We are coming on the air with more breaking news. President Trump posting on his Truth Social platform that he has fired Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem and that he will nominate Oklahoma Senator Markwayne Mullin to become the next DHS Secretary. Something has changed over the last few weeks, and what was it?
Well, it's interesting, Tom, you make that point. So this news, I think you can say, is stunning, but it's not surprising. We know the president has grown increasingly frustrated by Kristi Noem's performance as the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, most notably after a series of events that took place over the course of the last several days where she was testifying before Congress. She had been asked a series of questions specifically about the role she played in approving contracts, and notably won a $220 million ad campaign that was used to encourage immigrants to this country to self-deport. During the course of the questioning, Noem told Kennedy that the president knew about her decision to approve the ad campaign contracts. You can imagine that did not sit well with the White House, certainly with the president as well. And so that appears to have been the tipping point in this moment. The president in his post said that Mullin will become the next Homeland Security Secretary. Obviously, he needs to be confirmed.
So today, Kristi Noem is no longer the Secretary of Homeland Security. She's been given the title Special Envoy for the Shield of the Americas. The administration is presenting that as a promotion. Here's what I want you to sit with. She oversaw a $220 million taxpayer-funded ad campaign, starring herself, while her agency was in a 19-day shutdown. She labeled 2 slain American citizens domestic terrorists and refused to take it back at a Senate hearing 2 days ago. And a Republican senator told her on the record that he couldn't think of anyone whose mess he'd more proudly clean up. And she got a new title. I'm Jordan Vale. Hit that subscribe button because this story is not what they're calling it, and you need to see the whole thing.
Madam Secretary, I want to ask you about one of the first claims you made in the immediate aftermath of the shooting of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. You accused them both, I think, within hours of engaging in domestic terrorism. Who told you that these 2 victims were engaged in domestic terrorism? Where did you get that information from?
I've said before, and will repeat again for you, Senator, that those reports were coming from on-the-ground agents that were there. It was a chaotic scene.
So you spoke to agents on the ground who told you they were domestic terrorism?
Yes.
Domestic terrorists?
My team was working with me, talking to those agents on the ground to relay as much information as possible that we could to the American people.
Your team told you that people in Minneapolis said they were domestic terrorists. Did they tell you whether they had any basis for that claim within either minutes or hours of the shooting of Alex Preddy and Renee Good?
Sir, if you look back at the day of January 24th, there was a press conference earlier in the day, and then I held one hours later.
So I'm asking
and we
you,
were also
asking you, did you determine whether there was any basis for the sensational claim, a claim that proved to be utterly false, that these 2 victims were engaged in domestic terrorism? In the immediate aftermath of these shootings, your statements based on completely unvetted information that if it was even provided to you proved to be utterly false, that you were content to tell the whole country. Do you have any concern about misleading the whole country?
Look, that was a Republican from a deep red state. Said it publicly. This isn't left versus right. This is about whether competence still has a standard in this administration. Let's start with the money, because the money is where this story starts. In October 2025, the Department of Homeland Security awarded a $220 million no-bid contract for a national advertising campaign. A no-bid contract means the government didn't open the work to competitive bids. It went directly to specific firms without going through the standard procurement process. No-bid contracts are supposed to be reserved for urgent national security needs or situations where no other vendor exists. This one was used to produce TV ads featuring Kristi Noem, filmed at Mount Rushmore. The ads ran across the country. They were expensive, they were prominent, and they featured the sitting DHS Secretary in what critics and several Republican senators described as a self-promotional campaign funded entirely by American taxpayers. The controversy deepened when reporting, including from Punchbowl News, indicated the contract involved firms with ties to Noem's top aides. If that reporting is accurate, it means the money flowed toward people connected to her inner circle, awarded through a process that bypassed the competitive safeguard designed to prevent exactly that kind of arrangement. And the timing. The $220 million ad campaign was authorized and produced while DHS was experiencing a 19-day funding lapse, a partial shutdown of the agency Noem was supposed to be running. The agency responsible for border security, immigration enforcement, the Secret Service, and FEMA was operating under a funding gap while its secretary was filming content at one of the country's most iconic landmarks. At her Senate Judiciary hearing on March 3rd, 2 days ago, Senator John Kennedy, a Republican from Louisiana, asked her directly, "The president approved ahead of time you spending $220 million running TV ads across the country in which you are featured prominently?" She confirmed it. The president approved it. And Senator Tom Tillis, Republican North Carolina, said this at the same hearing. "What we've seen is a disaster under your leadership. I can't think of anybody I'd more proudly want to support to come in and clean up her mess." That's not opposition research. That's not a Democratic attack ad. That's a Republican senator in a Republican-controlled Senate saying those words to a Republican cabinet secretary 2 days before she was moved out of her job, which is a pretty significant thing to just let slide by, really.
What we've seen is a disaster. What we've seen is innocent people getting detained that turn out are American citizens. Under your leadership, Ms. Noem, a disaster.
And here's what gets me about this. You know what they call it when a kid gets a trophy just for showing up? A participation trophy. And I think about that every time I see someone in this administration fail spectacularly, publicly, expensively, and then get handed a new title and a new office. Washington has participation trophies. They just come with a government salary attached. But the $220 million, as bad as it is, isn't the reason Noem's departure carries the weight it does. The reason is Minneapolis. In January 2026, during an operation called Metro Surge, federal immigration agents shot and killed 2 American citizens in Minneapolis. Their names were Renee Good and Alex Preddy. Alex Preddy was an ICU nurse. I want you to sit with that for a second, not rush past it. Not a suspected criminal, not someone with a documented violent history, an ICU nurse. The kind of person who works overnight shifts keeping strangers alive in a hospital bed. Shot and killed by federal agents during an immigration enforcement operation in January 2026. Renee Good was also killed in the same operation. Both were American citizens. Following the shootings, Kristi Noem labeled both of them domestic terrorists. Not in a classified briefing, not in a preliminary investigation memo, publicly, in official statements representing the position of the Department of Homeland Security. And then, at a Senate Judiciary hearing on March 3rd, she was asked directly to retract that label. She refused. Representative Adam Schiff asked her at a House Judiciary hearing the very next day, "By what legal standard are you labeling these American citizens domestic terrorists without due process?" She didn't provide one. Because here's what domestic terrorist means legally. Under U.S. law, domestic terrorism involves acts dangerous to human life that appear intended to intimidate a civilian population, coerce government policy, or affect government conduct through mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. It's a specific legal category with a specific threshold. Applying it to American citizens who were killed by federal agents before any investigation was complete, before any charges were filed, before any court reviewed any evidence, isn't a legal determination. It's a press statement. And if you've been around long enough to watch this country work through Watergate, through Iran-Contra, through every moment where someone in power decided the rules applied to everyone else, you already know what this is. A cabinet secretary labeling dead American citizens terrorists without charges, without trial, without consequence until she became too expensive to keep. That's not a partisan issue. That's a rule of law issue. Here's the thing I can't get past. Domestic terrorist is a legal term. It has a definition. It has a threshold. Kristi Noem applied it to 2 dead American citizens. No charges, no trial, no conviction. Then sat in front of Congress and refused to say she got it wrong. A congressman asked what legal standard she used. She didn't answer. That's not a gotcha. That's the whole case. So who's coming in to replace her? President Trump announced today via Truth Social that Senator Markwayne Mullin of Oklahoma will become the next Secretary of Homeland Security effective March 31st, 2026. Mullen is a Republican senator, a former MMA fighter, and a consistent Trump ally throughout the second term. He has congressional oversight experience. Senators do review agency budgets, confirm officials, and sit on committees that touch Homeland Security. What he doesn't have is operational experience running a federal agency. He has never managed 260,000 employees. He has never overseen an active enforcement operation. What he is, right now, is someone the administration trusts, and someone who isn't Kristi Noem. In this particular moment, that second quality may be doing more work than the first. And here's the context that matters for understanding this transition. Noem is the first cabinet secretary to leave during Trump's second term. That's not a small thing. The administration has spent the past year projecting an image of stability, loyalty, and unified purpose. A team executing a mandate, not fracturing under it. Cabinet secretaries don't leave incompetent administrations because competent administrations don't put people in positions they can't handle. The first departure is always the one that gets studied because it reveals the gap between the image and the reality underneath it. The departure was widely characterized as forced, not just by opposition voices, but by outlets across the political spectrum, including the Washington Examiner, which is not a progressive publication. When a Republican-leaning outlet calls it an ouster, it's because the circumstances don't support calling it anything else. Noem testified on March 3rd. She confirmed the president approved the $220 million ad campaign. She refused to retract the domestic terrorist label. Tillis called her tenure a disaster. 2 days later, her replacement is announced. That's a timeline. Timelines tell stories. Mullen takes over March 31st, roughly 4 weeks from today, to prepare to run an agency with over 260,000 employees, covering the southern border, federal emergency management, the Secret Service, and immigration enforcement operations already subject to multiple ongoing federal lawsuits. Whether that transition is smooth or chaotic is an open question. What's not an open question is why it's happening, which is pretty clear when you look at what happened in that hearing room 2 days ago, really. And I need to say this directly. This administration loves to talk about law and order. It's a centerpiece of the brand. And yet the person running the agency responsible for enforcing those laws just publicly labeled 2 dead American citizens terrorists, without evidence, without charges, without a trial. That's not law and order. That's using the language of accountability to dodge it. So let's talk about the Special Envoy for the Shield of the Americas. Because the name sounds important. It sounds like a step up. And the administration is counting on most people not looking past the title. Here's what we actually know about it. The Shield of the Americas is described as a new hemispheric security initiative, a broad framework for coordinating immigration enforcement and border security across North and South America in partnership with regional governments. The Special Envoy title means Noem would serve as a diplomatic and strategic representative for that initiative, working across governments rather than running a domestic agency. On paper, that sounds significant. In practice, it means she no longer controls a budget. She no longer oversees 260,000 federal employees. She no longer runs operations like Metro Surge. She no longer sits in cabinet meetings with the same authority she had as a confirmed secretary. The Special Envoy title is a real government role, but it is not a promotion from running one of the largest federal agencies in the United States. The pattern this follows is worth naming. When someone becomes too politically costly to keep in a visible role, but too connected to simply fire outright, Administrations of both parties have historically created new positions, advisory roles, envoy titles, special coordinator designations, that provide the appearance of continued importance while removing the person from actual operational authority. You get the title, you lose the keys. Noem's situation fits that pattern cleanly. She was a liability. She confirmed in open testimony that the president personally approved a $220 million self-promotional ad campaign during an agency shutdown. She refused to retract terrorism labels applied to dead American citizens without due process. Republican senators called her tenure a disaster on the record. She couldn't stay where she was, and apparently she couldn't simply be let go. So a new role was created, one with a dramatic name and no agency to run. The question worth asking isn't whether the Shield of the Americas is a real initiative. It probably is, and hemispheric security coordination is a legitimate policy area that multiple administrations have worked on in various forms. The question is whether it required Kristi Noem specifically to lead it, or whether the role was shaped around the need to move her somewhere. And that distinction is worth knowing about. So here's where I land. They want you to call this a promotion. They want Special Envoy to sound like an upgrade from running one of the largest agencies in the federal government. They're counting on you hearing a new title and moving on. But we're owed a higher standard. An ICU nurse is dead and was called a terrorist. $220 million of your money went to TV ads featuring the person spending it. And accountability looks like a new business card. Y'all, failing up isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a pattern. Pay attention to it. Thanks for spending a few minutes digging into this with me. If you want more grounded, progressive commentary without the outrage bait, subscribe and stick around. Every time you watch, share, and engage, it helps build a community that believes democracy is worth understanding and defending. I'll see you in the next video.